So please tell us about your background, what film meant in your early life.
Wow. Okay. Well, I was born Danish, but my mother and stepfather moved to New York when I was 8 years old. So I grew up in Manhattan, and until I was 17. So of course I'm a product of America, in the best case scenario. And you know, my parents, you know, grew up with the notion that French cinema, especially the new wave cinema, was, you know, the only kind of cinema that ever existed, and everything had to be political. And I couldn't really rebel against my parents in many ways because, you know, they came out of the 60s and the 70s, very progressive hippie culture, and the one thing I knew that would piss my mother off is if I saw horror movies. So, you know, for me, European cinema was the Antichrist, and you know, American films were, you know, horror films were like, you know, real art. And it wasn't until I was 14 that I saw filmmaking as an art form with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I said to my mother, "That's art." And she goes, "No, it's not." And I said, "It is." And that's the kind of films I want to make.
Is Texas Chainsaw Massacre art? Why did it make you realize that?
It really came from the fact that I experienced, up until then, you know, I was used to seeing, you know, even being dragged to see like the 400 Blows by Truffaut by my mother or things like that, or I would see, you know, like a Steven Spielberg movie. But to me it was all very generic, and of course later on I realized that 400 Blows is a great masterpiece and it influenced me a lot, but I didn't know that when I was 11. But when I was 14, I realized that filmmaking didn't have to have a normal narrative structure. It could be a piece of sound, it could be a photography, it could be an emotion, essentially, because Texas Chainsaw Massacre doesn't have a story, it just has an emotion that's just relentless. And you know, it could be a John Cage music, it could be an, you know, Kenneth Anger shot, you know, it could be so many things other than a normal movie. And I said, that's, and I, you know, I'm colorblind, and so painting was not going to be an option. I'm dyslexic, so my writing was very limited, and I don't work with clay, so I didn't have a lot of artistic arenas to express myself, and so filmmaking became my kind of obsession very, very, very early on. And so when I was 24, I had worked for a few years for my uncle at the Cannes Film Festival for his distribution company, where I would go and see movies in the markets, and you know, at the same time he made films at home with the video camera, and my mother and stepfather had access to video equipment and editing, and so that was great. They were always very helpful, and yeah, I would be killing people in the apartment and shooting it on film, and my mother would be making the lunches. I always believe that art can't be taught. It's something you have to experience. You can, of course, have tools they can show you how to do technically, but at the same time there are no rules anymore. There's no right or wrong, there's just expression. And that's what's so interesting in the times we're living in. And I'm sad that I'm as old as I am, because I will never live another 70 or 80 years to see what the future will be like in terms of the digital revolution. You never know. But you know, that's why nowadays we're standing at year zero in terms of what filmmaking will become.
Mm-hmm. Everybody knows the story by now. You and Ryan were driving around, and basically that started it off. That's where you kind of found the movie. You listened to music. What kind of tapes were that back then?
It was R.S. Speedwagon's I Can't Fight This Feeling Anymore.
Right. And now, how can a director? I mean, this is again a purely director question, easy to answer probably. You don't have a driver's license, so how can you create the feel of driving and driving like that so very well?
I don't know. I guess I decided not. I don't really have an interest in cars. I don't know anything about cars, but I think cars are quite sexy when it comes to curves. Yeah. So to me,
talking about fetishes, I mean, Drive is all about showing the cars in a line in the wonderful garage, for example.
That's sexy.
That's sexy.
Just like blowing Christina Hendricks' head off is sexy, you know. Right. So it's just based on what you want to see.
what were the influences on Drive? Do you consider that neo-noir?
Well, the biggest influence in terms of filmmaking was Pretty Woman. I really love that movie, and the idea of something that is so fluffy and lighthearted, and yet so dark at the same time was I was always very amazed how Gary Marshall was able to do that. In terms of the noir, you can say that the James Saller's book is very noirish in a very odd way. It's about Hollywood and about this stuntman. Where in the book there's a lot of narrative back and forth, and he talks about his life a lot, and you see his childhood, and I eliminated all that because I wanted to make him more like One Eye, in a way, like more of an enigma, like the larger
One Eye and
life.
Valhalla Rising. Yeah.
And Ryan is such a great actor that he likes the challenges that brings with it, and was able to pull it off very, very uniquely, because he has this aura of saying 1,000 words without even having to say an actual line of dialogue. It's a very rare gift as an actor to have that. But you can maybe say that the noir genre of Drive is the neon noir, which was something that came in the early 80s. That was very short-lived because the neon went away, but it has that fluffy, creamy, light sensibilities, but still had a noir era, and it was all about Los Angeles.
The Drive soundtrack alone has become something like some years ago Pulp Fiction soundtrack or Jackie Brown soundtrack meant to people. It seems everybody has that and puts it on their party. So you hear that when you're back at home, you hear people often listening to that soundtrack as well, because it happens a lot in Germany right now.
Well, again, it was kind of funny because they hated the music.
Right.
Yeah, it was working with Cliff Martinez was great, by the way, and he went to #4 on album charts in America alone. So I always, every time I spoke to the financiers, I always said, "So did you see the record sales, by the way?"
I was wondering if you ever considered doing black and white. Maybe it would take that to a level that.
Well, I would love to work in black and white, and I love black and white movies. The problem with black and white is that you can't sell it, and that's just the reality. Yeah, but Rumblefish didn't make any money. And it's very important for filmmakers here that you have to really understand it is, in the end, about money if you want to survive more than one movie.
Yeah,
sure.
I would like to thank you so much for being here this time. It was an intense day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.